Welcome back to the Mentor Show, which offers quick lessons packaged within minisodes for busy founders and startup leaders like you. I'm Adel, and I'm being mentored live and unscripted by Ed, who's built, sold, turned around, and scaled startups all the way to the New York Stock Exchange. He's based in the US, a developed economy, and I'm based in Dubai, a hub within an emerging economy. And we compare notes. This is real talk, no scripts, no theory. Let's get into it. And this also, by default, creates a challenge for the founders as well, right? Or the CEO. Because if there is a limited number of success stories, now here in the region, we do have the success stories of, again, Talabat, Souk, Hunger Station, all of these different businesses that had successful, some of them exits, some of them IPO. But the question comes back to me as the early employee, or even like in the case of a consultant, right? If I'm joining as a part-time consultant, when the founders tell me or the CEO tells me, I'll give you some shares, the other question that comes up, based on what valuation? And when they say it's discounted, is it the date today? Because most of the fundraising activities and they're raised through signing a safe document. That means there is no valuation yet. So yeah, so as a leader joining, I'll always have these questions and we have no answers in such a scenario. And the same thing with the founders. How do they need to think about that? Of course, I can't afford paying someone their market value in cash. I need to incentivize them to stay through shares. Do I give them shares from the beginning, grant them those shares? And if I can't attract, that means I'll tie up some people with me that I don't really need to tie them up with me. Some of the investors might not be happy about it as well, because those investors are not very familiar with the concept. And I accepted their money because they have access to the channels, they have access to the resources. So these are some questions that come in mind after hearing your answer.
Yeah, I would say that again, let me anchor this conversation in the context of the developed Western marketplace. It is understood that if you are a startup company actively looking for outside investment dollars from high net worth individuals or professional venture capital resources, the use of shares of equity to entice key employees is absolutely understood. And usually the amount of the business that is set aside for the issuance of those shares is anywhere from a low of 10% to as high as 20% of the common equity. The other concept that's very well developed in the West that is still not prevalent in the GCC is the difference between common shares and preferred shares. And the difference is actually quite simple. Common shares are what the founders and the employees have opportunity to participate in. Preferred shares is usually set aside only for the people that put money. They actually write a check to invest cash in the business. And they're preferred because of a few things. On the sale of the business, they get paid first. That's one of the preferences, hence the name preferred shares. If the business were to go bankrupt, any proceeds that come from the shutdown of the business would go first to the debt holders and then the preferred shareholders. Common might not get anything. In difficult times, if a company has taken professional money but has not performed, so they did not create greater value, the next round of financing might have a 2 times preference. So if I put in 10 million at a 2 times preference, then at some liquidity event in the future, I get paid 2 times my money. So 20 million. Once that 20 million gets paid, gets taken off the top, whatever is left is then passed along to the common shareholders. Okay. That's another preference, is a multiple, the 2x multiple. Could be 2x, could be, I've never seen it go higher than 3x, but there's no reason why it couldn't. So the financing process in the West contemplates the use of shares, the use of equity as an incentive for key employees. To make my point even more specific, I want you to appreciate that back in about, I want to say 2015, Talabat in Kuwait was acquired by Rocket Internet. This was a private transaction. So this was a full acquisition of Talabat by Rocket. And at that time, the two co-founders, was Mohammed Al-Jafar and Abdulaziz Al-Lugani. I hope I've pronounced their names correctly.
Yeah, Muhammad
Um,
Jafar and Logani, yes.
Correct. And those two gentlemen really had all of the shares of Talabat. I'm not aware of any employees that participated in equity prior to the Rocket Internet acquisition. Okay, so I think that's actually a pattern that I've seen in the GCC, because a lot of this is just cultural practice in business in various parts of the developing world, which is, if I'm the founder, I own the company. And if I'm hiring people, I pay them a salary. Maybe I pay them a bonus if they over exceed on performance. But the idea of sharing equity is not that common. The idea of having two classes of shares is not that common. With the development of venture capital through companies like MVP or BICO or other VCs in the region, that concept is being introduced, but it's still not very prevalent. So again, if I'm an employer, in the interest of transparency and fair dealing, I would hire people and I would say, I'm going to pay you a salary. Is that salary appropriate? If you exceed performance, I'll pay a bonus. Is that of interest to you? And I stop there unless I've actually spent the time and the money and the legal resources to construct an equity plan, right? So that's how I would deal as an employer. As an employee, I would not get excited about owning a piece of the business unless you understand what is the liquidity event, right? The liquidity event is your business gets bought. The liquidity event is your business merges. The liquidity event is you IPO. There's a fourth liquidity event. Let's say I joined the company and the company was worth $5 million and I stay 4 or 5 years. I work hard, I do a great job. And now at the end of 5 years, the value of the business has increased from 5 million to, let's say, $15 million. So a 3 times increase. Would the business consider buying my shares back and actually writing me a check, right? That does get done. I've had that happen personally. But the typical practice is, if it's still a private company, at the end of your employment, for if you've been there long enough to fully vest in those shares that you were awarded as options, it could be that on the day of my hire, the options were worth $1 a share. Let's say I have 10,000 shares, right? So once I vest, if I write the company a check for $10,000, those shares are mine to keep for as long as the company is around. And if the company has increased in value from, let's say, 5 million to 15 million at the time that I joined, then now that $10,000 is actually worth 50,000 minus the 10,000 that I wrote to buy the shares. So I'm sitting on an appreciated value of $40,000 plus my bonus, plus my salary, etc. But you still need a market to sell those shares. You still need a buyer who wants to buy those shares. They could be private party, or if it was an IPO, it would be public party.
That's it for this minisode. Big thanks to Ed and to all of you for tuning in. If this sparked something, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and make sure you share it within your network. Got a question for Ed? Drop it within the comments. See you next time.
Please note, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated organization. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. We encourage listeners to conduct their own research and consult with relevant professionals before making any business or career decisions.